Every spring, hundreds of authors gather on the UCLA campus for the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. The BookTV Bus is there, and inside the BookTV Bus, we have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is his new book, On the Shoulders of Giants, My Journey Through the Harlem Renaissance. You say in this book that the Harlem Renaissance actually influenced your life. How?
Well, a lot of the ideals and prominent personalities were pointed out to me when I was a child. And I heard the music almost all the time, every day in my household. So a lot of the influences were very intense. And then people who themselves were influenced by the Harlem Renaissance, people like James Baldwin or Chester Himes, were authors that I had read, and what they absorbed from the Harlem Renaissance transferred over into my life.
What was your life like in Harlem? And when did you move there?
I was born in Harlem, 1947. And when I was 3.5 years old, we moved just outside of Harlem. I'd say maybe only 3/4 of a mile. Technically, we weren't in Harlem, but because all of my mom's friends and all of the things that she knew where to shop and everything were in Harlem, I spent a lot of time there. My babysitter was there. For most social things, we went back to that neighborhood. So it was a very intense relationship with the neighborhood. Even though I wasn't physically living there, I had a very intense relationship with that neighborhood.
And you talk about your discovery of books there. What happened?
Well, for me, my dad absolutely was a bibliophile. He read books constantly, and very early on in life, I realized that books were about information, and my father felt that knowledge was power, especially if you have an understanding of things that you need to do. If you read about it and you've boned up on it beforehand, that knowledge could help you on your path to success. So reading was a very important issue. It's something that my dad learned from his family. My family's from the island of Trinidad. Literacy is a very important issue there.
When did you decide that you were going to leave Harlem and go do something else?
Well, I left New York really to go study at UCLA. That was, I wanted to play basketball here and pursue my higher education. I thought I could do a good job at both while I was here at UCLA. I think I was right.
How long did you spend away from Harlem before you went back or would visit back?
Geez, literally not, just a couple of days. For example, in order to go to high school, I had to travel through Harlem. My neighborhood was just on the other side of Harlem from Midtown Manhattan. So if you're going to talk about me physically being there, I went there every day, just about.
Who influenced your interest in history?
I think my interest in history was developed because of the neighborhood that I was raised in. Inwood is the neighborhood which is on the periphery of Harlem, and it's just beneath Washington Heights, which is the last bastion of the American Army in Manhattan before the British chased them out. It was a Revolutionary War battlefield. As a child, I found musket balls and arrowheads and old bottles from probably New Amsterdam at various places in the neighborhood. So I was very keenly aware of what had gone before there, and it was always something that I found fascinating. The fact that George Washington actually slept in that neighborhood and was there during the Revolutionary War, and then afterwards. There was an old Dutch farmhouse on Broadway at 203rd Street that he used to sleep at when he would travel from New York City, which was at that point Lower Manhattan, up to Albany. It was the first leg of the journey to Albany from New York. So George Washington slept in my neighborhood. You've got to be interested in history at that point.
Who was Philip Peyton?
Philip Peyton? I'm not familiar with that.
What was the name of the real estate agent in the early part who actually was influential in bringing...
Okay.
Is that Philip Peyton?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. He was someone who had not achieved very much success because of the hostility of the white inhabitants of Harlem. And he finally hammered out a deal with some of the white landlords to rent their unoccupied buildings to black tenants.
About what time are we talking about?
We're talking about approximately between 1915 and 1920. And in doing that, he really ensured that Harlem would become a mecca for blacks living in New York City, because in other parts of the city they encounter a lot of hostility toward their presence. The building of Penn Station really tore down the Tenderloin neighborhood, which was a very seedy neighborhood right in central Manhattan, between 34th Street and 23rd Street, off of 7th and 8th Avenues. Very tough neighborhood, a lot of saloons, brothels. It's a rough place. And blacks wanted to get out of there, and Harlem was a very attractive place to move to.
Was that the Tenderloin riots of 1900? Is that
they had riots in that neighborhood between blacks and Irish immigrants. It's an ongoing story in the history of New York.
And in Harlem, as it was going through the Renaissance, where do you think the power came from?
I think the power came from the fact that black Americans had an idea that there was a place that they could go where the day-to-day problems of Jim Crow segregation were not pounding on them all the time, and they had some time and space to show what they could do on the positive side. It wasn't just about surviving Jim Crow racism. They had the ability and time to show what they could do in many areas: literature, the arts, social activism, even sports. The Negro Leagues baseball teams and the Harlem Winds basketball team were also really a part of this.
And you write in your book on page 48 about today's Harlem. You say today there's a Starbucks, a Disney store, an Old Navy, a Gap, and the offices of former President Bill Clinton. But it doesn't matter how trendy or mall-like it becomes on the outside, it will always be populated by people of color who know that shopping at the Gap or the Disney store won't make them any less black in the eyes of white America.
Well, that's a very, very real fact. Race is still a big issue in America. I hope it's something that we will eventually overcome in this century, and realize that we're all Americans. We might be of different hues and faiths and backgrounds, but we're all Americans, and we all believe in the red, white, and blue.
Did you face discrimination when you were in basketball at UCLA?
There were times when I would hear comments. I would hear racist comments. I don't think that any black American goes through his whole life, especially if he's a prominent person, without hearing some resentment about the fact that he is successful, and some white Americans don't think that that's acceptable. But I also have to say that a lot has changed since I was a child, and I hope the positive change continues.
What was your encounter with Martin Luther King?
Well, my encounter with Martin Luther King had to do with the fact that he came and addressed a program that I was involved in between my junior and senior year in high school. And the program was called Harlem Youth Unlimited, and it was set up to train the kids in Harlem how to make it a better place. And he came and addressed the participants in that program. And I was in a journalism workshop, so I got press credentials and got a chance to cover it with the national press that was following Dr. King. It was only a year since his I Have a Dream speech, so he was a very important person in the national news media, and all of the mainstream press corps came to hear his address and question him afterwards, and I got to participate in the press conference. There's a picture in the book that shows me there with all of those people.
What kind of impact did that have on you?
Hearing Dr. King speak had a profound impact on me. It really motivated me. One of the things that he told the assembled participants was the fact that he knew that already this program was going to be a success, because we were already thinking the right way about how to make Harlem a better place, and he was positive that we would be successful.
But you write in here that you weren't exactly certain that the nonviolence way was the way to go that time.
At that time, I questioned the policy of nonviolence, because I saw so many people being murdered and brutalized by people who believed in racism. And when you're a young person, you think the only way to respond to violence is with violence. It takes you a while before you're mature enough to appreciate that. It was after I saw the movie Gandhi that I really appreciate Martin Luther King's wisdom in taking the nonviolent approach, because it left room for healing. And in the ensuing years, I've come to admire and appreciate Nelson Mandela, because Dr. King was an inspiration to him, and it enabled him to do the same thing for his homeland and have it be where there isn't a legacy of bloodshed. That's very important. And it's something that as a young person I didn't particularly understand and appreciate.
You tell the story about getting kind of caught up in a riot in Harlem. How old were you?
I was 17 years old.
Yeah?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, I came out of the subway just to go by some of my old haunts on 125th Street. And when I came out of the subway, I stepped in. I'd been at the beach all day, and a riot ensued that day. I didn't hear anything about it. I stepped out, literally came out of the subway station, and things were happening. People were throwing rocks and making Molotov cocktails, and all the sirens were going on, fire trucks up and down 125th Street. And it was an extraordinary experience. I'm glad I haven't had to repeat that experience.
You mentioned that you were a little panicked because of your height. You were afraid that you might kind of stand out.
Yeah, I might kind of stand out and catch a stray or intentional bullet there. I got out of there pretty quick.
You talk about learning 3 things from that whole summer of violence in there, in Harlem, and you say one was that the importance of reading history. What is that importance?
Well, people who don't understand history don't understand how problems came to be, and if you don't understand how problems came to be, how are you going to understand how to fix them? A lot of problems are specific to their origins, and unless you understand what the origins are, you end up trying to deal with it in a way that doesn't get the job done. You
also say you learned the importance of self-educating. How did you do that, and what is that importance to you? For me, my self-education came as a result of me wanting to know about what Harlem was about. That summer that I worked in that program, I had to write about Harlem, and I hadn't any prior knowledge of it. I knew a lot of the prominent facts about it. I was familiar with the music of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, but I didn't understand really how all of that came about. And in reading about the Harlem Renaissance, I realized what that was all about, and had a firm footing in what Harlem had meant to America as a whole, and to black people in particular. And it made it a lot easier for me to write the stories and cover the subjects that we had to cover. And the third thing you say you learned is the power of words. Words are extremely powerful. They have the power to heal, they have the power to hurt, and we really have to understand that if we're going to heal the racial rift in our country, and do and say the right things that make it possible for Americans to come together. I hope that this is something that continues to happen. What will people get in this book? Well, they'll get a great insight into what the Harlem Renaissance was all about, and what it meant to black America. It was a very special time, because it made Americans think about black Americans in a totally different light, and that they had something to offer this nation other than their physical labor. That was a very important issue at that time. And you also integrate your own story then? Oh yeah, my own story is part and parcel of all of that, because the Harlem Renaissance intensely influenced my parents, and through their parenting of me, I absorbed a lot of the same lessons. What is it like for you to be an author? And people call you an author, historian now, when for so many years you were only known as a basketball player. It's very special for me to be known as an author. I feel that being limited to just an athletic career takes away part of who I am. And being able to publish books and have people read them and enjoy them
really gives me a great sense of gratification. And especially I hear a lot from parents who use my books as source material to give their children an idea of what they have to be proud of, because that doesn't often come in standard history textbooks. So if black parents can use my books to inspire their children, I'm very happy about it. And I'm very happy when white Americans can read my book and understand that black Americans mean something to this country and have contributed so much.
You write about what you consider to be a pivotal point in your life with a man by the name of Jack Donahue. Who was he, and why was that a pivotal point in your life?
Jack Donahue was my high school coach, and he was an extraordinary human being. We had a bad moment when he chose to use the wrong name to describe what he thought I was acting like. That in no way diminishes what he meant to my life, but at that time that he said that, it really destroyed my trust in him. He was someone that I really admired and trusted, and to have him question me using that word, the N-word, it destroyed a lot of my confidence and trust in people. It made me feel that maybe white Americans couldn't get over that. Of course, that wasn't what he was all about, but when you're talking to a 16-year-old, it can really have a negative effect. Coach Donahue and I worked all of this out decades ago, and he's passed on, but when he passed on, he was somebody that I still loved and considered a friend and great mentor. But it really, for a few years there, it really disturbed me what he had to say. But it motivated me to understand what all of this was all about, and for that, maybe that was necessary for me to learn the things that I ended up learning.
I ask you that because I think you turned 60 this year?
Just turned 60 2 or 3 weeks ago.
So, and there's a new book out called The N-Word. Jabbar Yassim is asking the question, should it be used, can it be used, and who should use it and who shouldn't use it? Well, it seems like a long time and we're still having the same discussion. Well,
you know, the N-word really originally just described people who came from the Niger River and the Niger Delta. It would be just like describing people from the Mississippi Delta. But it took on a very negative context in America and has been used as a bludgeon against black Americans. So this needs to be thought out. It needs to be discussed and thought out. And we see all the controversy like with Don Imus. Again, this goes back to the power of words. They are very powerful, and we really have to understand what we're saying before we say that. We need to take some thought. We need to heal the racial divide in America. And in order to do that, it's going to take well-meaning people on all sides of the issue to discuss it and come to some consensus.
Is hip-hop part of the problem or part of the solution?
I think hip-hop is both part of the problem and part of the solution. There have been hip-hop artists who have had a positive outlook and approach to their art, and there are some that exploit it in order to ingratiate themselves with certain parts of the community that I would not consider to be very positive. We have to look at the problem and deal with it. It's a two-edged sword.
What's it like for you at age 60 to try to be influencing another generation?
I feel like I have an advantage in trying to influence young people because I have some credibility with them. And the fact that I'm a scholar is something that initially they might not appreciate, but in getting to know my work, it enables them to have something to study and discuss and hopefully enrich their minds. And that to me is very positive development. I've had parents come up to me and say, geez, thanks for writing these books. They've enabled me to give my kids what they need to know about their heritage as Americans and as black people, and that's a very positive development as far as I'm concerned.
And we can't leave without taking a look at the Richard Avedon photo.
Who's that skinny kid with hair? Man, it can't be me.
What year was this taken? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember. That picture was taken in 1963. I was 16 years old.
Do you remember posing for the picture?
Yes, I do. It was taken on Amsterdam Avenue at between 60th and 61st Street in the playground there.
Did you have an appreciation at that time for who Avedon was?
I didn't know Richard Avedon had made all these fashion photographs for Vogue and all of those important fashion magazines. He was just somebody, my coach said, this photographer wants to take some pictures of you. He's a pretty good photographer. That was about all I knew about Richard Avedon at that point.
When did you convert to Islam?
I converted to Islam in the mid-60s, approximately 1966, 1967. It was a process of a couple of months. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and was very impressed with what he had to say about Islam and Christianity. I had been a Christian up to that point. Probably at that point I was agnostic. I kind of became disillusioned with the Catholic Church when I found out their history of association with the slave trade. But studying Islam, I